Warning: this podcast contains blasphemy, heresy, and profanity. Proceed at your own risk.
'Cause I'm exactly where I want to be. Yeah, I'm a sinner through and through. And I'll be waiting in hell for you.
Welcome to the Skeptical Satanists.
Right. Welcome to the podcast. I'm finally back, and I've got Kent Schofield here with me. I pronounced that right?
Schofield, but it's
Schofield. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Easy mistake. Never know to pronounce the C or not. So
Yeah. All right. Well, how are you doing today?
not too bad at all. Excited to be on, and I like being able to share ideas and discuss things with people. It's especially when there is light tensions there, but with somebody intelligent enough to discuss it with me.
Yeah. We've got an interesting topic and up for debate, I guess. We aren't really probably going to debate any about it.
Right. more of just a general discussion.
Right.
Where I see it going.
So how do you identify well, let's start with your gender, I guess, and then we could go with your background a bit.
Yeah, no problem. So I identify as a man. So he, him, and I don't mind any neutral or other pronouns. Don't bother me either. But just I don't have the staunch you must call me a man kind of thing. That doesn't bother. None of that bothers me. So I'm pretty open with it. And as far as my background, I mean, I'm 33 years old. I was born and raised in a very conservative religious environment and family. And I was a very ardent and sincere believer most of my life until about my early to mid 20s, when I started a little bit of a deconversion process. And I would say by the time I was either 25 or maybe 26, in that neighborhood, I was pretty confident saying that I wasn't a Christian anymore, but I still held to some sort of supernatural views for another maybe year or two until I felt myself firmly as a naturalist and atheist. So that's where I'm at now.
It's interesting. We have similar backgrounds then, it sounds like. What branch of Christianity were you under?
Southern Baptist.
Oh, wow. It's very similar then. I was Independent Baptist.
Oh, okay.
I mean, did you guys like protest the funerals and stuff? Like
we didn't go that far, no, because I'm in California, and so we didn't have the connections to that. I'm trying to think if I even knew about them. I don't think I did until I was well on my path to becoming an atheist, is when I finally heard of Westboro and their activities. We had similar views in the sense of like, gayness bad, trans bad, all that stuff. But we weren't as confrontational about it. And I didn't participate in it, but I do remember there was like a big, a protest kind of thing protest demonstration thing that my church wanted to do. My phone got all dark. Anyway, there we go. Bam. That my church wanted to do against abortion, anti-abortion thing, going out and holding signs of horrendous aborted fetuses and crap like that. That was the most in-your-face thing I remember my church being a part of, and I wasn't part of it personally. I backed that ideology, but I didn't go partake in that. So
I actually was part of something like that. They had, I think they were doing that all across the U.S., and it's actually the town that I'm living in now, down at the four-way stop. It wasn't, I mean, they weren't like being loud about it or anything. It was actually a silence for the aborted fetuses or whatever, holding up signs and stuff for it and all of that. But yeah, that's crazy. It's very similar to what I'd grown up in. They were always supportive of the military and stuff though. So like, yeah, that didn't fly, and they tried to distance themselves from basically any other religion but their little tiny speck on the map. And of course we were the only true Christians.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Well, the topic that we have up today is gender and toxic masculinity, and we've discussed that a little bit on Facebook. We've went back and forth a little, just I mean, friendly natured talk.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I've been fairly like gender dysphoric the past few years, and trying to break down a lot of that. I'd come out of Christianity about the same as you, like 25 or 26. I actually, it started for me to unravel whenever I started questioning some of the more racist things that were being said in
Mm.
things like that, because it was a very rural area and those things
Yeah.
were influenced as well. But then I started listening to Dr. Daryl Ray on
Mm.
shows Secular Sexuality. Um, so it all kind of came unraveled at that point, and
Oh
started
yeah.
watching things like the Atheist Experience and stuff like that. I was I would have been in the deist area longer if it wasn't for like watching Jen Peoples and Tracy Harris talk about things that like it it couldn't have been a more like serendipitous thing. It was just
Yeah.
perfect the way that it lined up, because I'm like, oh well, you know what, maybe there's a thing out there, and maybe the maybes kept coming up, and
Yeah.
like, well, I can hold on to this little aspect, and keep this.
Exactly.
And
I
then
think
Tracy,
that's a natural progression from that. From that, I know and I know and I know and I'm so certain, and then it shakes, and then you're like, well, maybe you almost don't want to go from certain to certain. You need that in between maybe time. Bring up the maybes, but don't hold on too tightly, and maybe
yeah.
this, and then no, that doesn't work out, and then just kind of
Well,
work your way to whatever.
it was funny because it was like I might have been there for like a month, and Tracy Harris, I'd started watching Atheist Experience at that point, and Tracy Harris was on with Jen Peoples, and they had a caller call in with the exact maybes that I had in my head. And Tracy's just like, well, okay, but how would you distinguish that from nothing being there at all? What would
Yeah,
make you assume that other than just a thing? I'm like, oh.
yeah, you start to realize like, okay, then you get the whole concept of kind of how the whole scientific way of thinking operates, because it's like, yeah, maybe there's an invisible dragon in my garage, but what?
Yeah,
How do if I can't touch it, I can't feel it, I can't hear it, smell it, doesn't poop on the ground, and I don't slip in the poop on the ground or whatever. Like, how can I determine that versus there's actually nothing there?
yeah, it was
And that you start to hold that
fucking
standard up against anything that anybody maybe's at you, like, okay, well, how do I distinguish that from any other option that I can imagine?
right. It was tough breaking down like faith, and taking that out as an epistemology for me. It was,
Yeah.
yeah, which then street epistemology and debate groups and
Oh
all
yeah.
of that kind of broke things down even further for me. And
That's I think that's when I ended up finally hitting like full naturalist atheist, was through some of the debate groups I was in. And during that, I was already there, and that's when I learned about street epistemology, and uh,
yeah,
I really enjoyed that for a while. I still do enjoy it. I just don't watch it as much because sometimes it's painful. Like, I feel like I want to be asking the questions that are in my head, and if the interviewer isn't asking the question I think of, it gets me like antsy. I'm like, no, ask this question instead. So I don't watch it all the time anymore because of that. I
I
thought of so many different ways. So.
I was really into it more there for a while, and I practiced a little bit in some Discord groups and stuff, and it was always interesting being on. It didn't matter which end of it you were on; there was always something that you were kind of picking apart and learning on the way. But
Yeah.
whether it's learning how to ask questions or what questions to ask or thinking
Yeah.
those things up or whatever, but um, then there was something I don't know. I ran into. It seems like there's this kind of fascist agenda that's going into those and sweeping in with the skeptic area and with
Really?
the street
Oh, yeah.
epistemology thing. And it just kind of like purposefully trying to sway somebody in a direction with the questions rather than
Yeah. truly Socratic about it. Yeah.
Yeah, like red pilling, or if you're
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
that's kind of seemed to be oozing into all of it. So it's like that. I
It
kind of
frustrates me so bad because it's so clearly not properly skeptical. Like the red
right,
pill logic is so clearly like loaded language, biased axioms, and it's just like how do they not see that they're not being skeptical? And that's
yeah,
where I start feeling like, let me in to ask the questions, because I'm not saying
yeah,
I'm a genius or anything, but it makes me feel more like I have the opportunity to press what they're saying and thinking to see if I can find a hole in the fabric, to see if I can show them like, look, there's a problem there.
right. Yeah, one of the things, and we'll get into it a little bit more later, but one of the things I noticed that they've been doing that with is like the woke thing, and
Yep.
that's being kind of, and it's sad seeing it happen because some people just don't know how to respond back whenever it's being set up in a Socratic method way, and they're trying
Exactly.
to manipulate the conversation by doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, the loaded questions, the loaded language, and the biased presuppositions that underlie the axioms they lay out. Like, if they're going after gender ideologies, so to speak, if they're going after those type of things, and they want to say like trans people are invalid, so they're asking somebody who's supporting the trans identities. They'll say like, oh well, if there's only two, if gender is only a social construct, then why does a trans woman have to actually change her body if it's just a social construct? Why can't she just, change her construct or whatever like that? It's like,
Yeah,
why does she have to do this? How is it innate to her if it's just a social construct? You can't have an innate social construct. It has to be taught. And it's like, there's a way to explain that, but it takes a lot of steps.
right, right. I've seen it done with racism, systemic racism, and stuff as well, because
Oh yeah.
they'll try to muddy the waters and push it all under elitism or classism or whatever, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's part of it, but it's not the whole picture of it.
Hmm.
You're taking and you're trying to it's like a blanketed statement that they're trying to do and sweep everything under one thing. And there's more to it than that. Like you said, we can explain that out, but it's not
Hmm.
simple
Yeah.
as what they're making it out to be.
Exactly. And if they stop you along the way at every question and don't allow you to unravel what was underlying what they said in the first place, then you're just not going to get anywhere.
Yep, exactly. So, when we were discussing gender, and let's see, you had a post that I'd seen before that had been coming up all over my news feed, and it was a toxic masculinity post. I can't remember. It was something from Avatar, I think.
I'm like, I at this moment I can't even remember it either. I do remember we had the conversation, and I remember a couple points about where you stood on it. But I can't remember what the start of the conversation was either.
Well, the thing, it was like, this is terrible. This is the blind leading the blind on it now at this point. I was
You might
trying to
jog my memory though.
Yeah, I was trying to get this all arranged before, and I've had health issues and stuff that have gotten in the way, and I just didn't have any sleep or energy to do this.
No worries.
But yeah, it was a meme with one of I can't even remember the names of the characters in Avatar, which is terrible and it makes it worse. But it had the old dude from Avatar in it, and then it had like one of the bad guys characters in it. And it said it was comparing, contrasting them with masculinity and toxic masculinity, or
yeah. So you did jog my memory. It's Uncle Iroh, and he was the healthy masculinity. He was the wholesome masculinity, and the toxic masculinity. It was I forget his name too. He's the Flame Emperor. I want to say like Zuko, but that might have been I get it mixed up between him and his son, who is the prince that's up and coming. That basically Uncle Iroh is raising him, and it's a great. Honestly, if anybody's seen the show, it's a great way of grasping the concept that I'm getting at, because there's Uncle Iroh, and his brother is the one who's the emperor that has the toxic masculinity. So they're two brothers. One is very toxic. One is much more wholesome. And so the uncle, the emperor's brother, he ends up in a situation where he's basically having to raise his nephew from about adolescence until younger adulthood, and trying to help him overcome a lot of the toxic things that were ingrained in him by being raised by his father up to that point. And so that's kind of a cool, if you hear this conversation and go watch that show, or if you've already watched it and want to like take this in, that'd be a cool way to tie it back. So yeah, so that you did jog my memory. So now we have something to go off of.
Well, now this is how I kept seeing it presented differently than the way that you're like. What I kept seeing happen was that it was trying to be pushed into a way that was like, well, Shane the Skeptic I was on his page, and I'd seen it come up there first, and I'd seen it come up a few times, but I kept asking, like, well, what makes these behaviors or these traits toxic, or what makes them not toxic, but what makes them masculine in particular?
Right.
And I couldn't get a real good answer. I did finally find a few people that gave decent answers. I think when you posted it. It's difficult to get people that want to think about it from a logical standpoint or from a rational standpoint. Yeah. They want to kind of just jump to, well, why are you asking this question? It's like, I'm not saying that these things don't exist, or I'm not saying that it isn't an issue, because I do, know what a toxic, I know what it's describing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way that I was seeing it, Shane the Skeptic was skewing it in a way that was like, well, people are just, see, he's one that's like the anti-woke thing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or I'd seen a lot of that stuff in his posts recently, and I do have a screenshot of at least one of those I can share up here in a minute. But he was going along the lines of, well, men are shying away from masculine traits because of the toxic masculinity. And like they're trying to be more feminine, and this is why.
Yeah.
Which was a weird take to have on it. I'd thought,
really?
Like, I don't think that's the thing that's happening. I think it's just more like myself. I've broken down so much, like with the way that I was raised in that brand of Christianity. They put you in a box to where you have to fit under this gender, under this sexual orientation. You are this. You can't be anything outside of this box. This is what you are, and anything outside of that is sinning, and all of that. So they kind of force you into a certain way, and then after you've broken those things down and deconverted, then I'm going like, well, what does it mean to be male, or to be or to have these masculine traits, or what's masculinity, what's feminine, where are these lines at? And it's like, it just becomes more and more blurry to me, because it seems like it's stereotypes. Like at a certain point, it's just society. And I mean, this is coming also from, like, whenever I started getting into street epistemology and stuff, I started kind of branching into Discord groups and things too. And instead of being an asshole and just being like, well, making fun of people for being trans or for being non-binary, I actually started asking honest questions to them, and got like good responses back about gender and the differences, because I was still sweeping gender under like sex, and so I didn't realize there was a distinguishing factor between biological sex and gender until I started
Yeah.
talking to these people. So a lot of it had to do, like, after breaking those things down. Now it's been, years since that. It's become, well, where am I at with all of that? And like I said, I'm pretty dysphoric on it because I count myself as non-binary, and I prefer they them pronouns and stuff, because it does make me feel weird to have masculine traits and things applied to me that I don't think I've ever really fit well under
Mm.
that box that I was put in. So it's difficult to say where I'm at outside of that.
Hmm.
I'm still piecing that together, but non-binary seems to be where I'm at with it.
That's a cool place to be, coming from like a place of enforced masculine identity. Even just being able to step back and say, like, that doesn't suit me. Maybe I'm not on the opposite end of the spectrum, but I'm going to at least step out of that masculine role and really process where I sit in terms of how I fit into society in a gendered way, or a gender way, however it may fall for you. That's something to be proud of, because that is, like you said, we're raised with these ideals, and we're taught to categorize things in certain ways, and those categories themselves end up controlling how we think about things. And so I think some of us get very lucky with the timing and content of what we're exposed to in a way that gets us to actually examine the categories that we are taught to think within. So like for gender, like if you don't even realize that there is a distinction between gender and sex, and that is not even touching on the fact that sex itself can be far more complicated than the male female that we're taught in fourth grade or whatever, like just coming to terms with the fact that what your body appears to be versus how you fit into society based on societal expectations, that there can be differences between those connections there. That is a big step. And being able to identify that, even if you don't have a hard stance of this is how I identify, like this is exactly how I want to be, just knowing that what you were wasn't right. That's a big step.
Well, it was really great too, because like you said, it's I mean, I lucked out with the people that I was talking to as well, because there were some very very intelligent people in the trans community that were like, I'm like, well, where's the evidence for this stuff? I know you guys have to have something that you're basing this off of. I mean, I don't think you're just making it up. So where is this at? And they like gave me more links than I could imagine on the topic.
Yeah.
It was scientifically backed things and everything, and I'm like, wow, it
Yeah.
blew my mind. And I'd started to actually feel things out from there, and this is like years past that process that I've finally come to. Yeah, I don't fit in these things. So this is where I was coming from and what direction I was coming from whenever I was seeing this post and everything about toxic masculinity. Then it became a thing of like, I'm honestly asking, what is it about these traits and these behaviors that make them masculine in themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And if there are toxic masculine traits, then are there toxic feminine traits and non-binary traits or behaviors as well, or like?
Right. So I would say, and this is, I don't think I know enough to answer all of those questions, but my first my first reaction to that set of questions would be, we live in a society that's masculine dominated. So I believe that the what's the word I'm looking for here? The potential for toxicity in the dominant gender expression is going to be much higher than any of the subordinate, the minority, however you want to say that, the minority gender expressions aren't going to have as many ways in which to express themselves toxically, because they don't have the kind of social dominance to assert themselves in a toxic way. That doesn't mean there won't be none, but I'm pretty sure it's much less. At least I think I could defend that. So masculinity being the dominant the force in our society, you know, the masculine people are the ones who kind of run the show. So if a masculine person abuses his partner, he can get away with that in a masculine dominant society, and especially if that partner is taught to subordinate themselves towards their masculine partner. They may, okay, well, I deserve it. He says I deserve it, or I haven't been listening to him, or if I leave him, I'll never be able to take care of myself on my own. I need a masculine person to take care of me. And in a society that like ours, that may be partially true. It's not obviously not as true as it was 50, 60 years ago. But
do you think that affects like outside of the, how do I want to put this? So do you think that that's having the same effect in relationships that aren't just like straight relationships? Do you think that gay relationships and things like that toxic masculinity can affect those as well?
Yeah, I would definitely say it can. Especially, I mean, if you asked me that maybe 10 years ago, assuming that I was on board with the concept of toxic masculinity back then, I'm not sure. But if you had asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said, like, no, they're both guys. Like, how could one of them, how could there be a toxic masculine imbalance there? But, it's obviously the case.
I think that in itself is the toxic masculinity thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, obviously now my answer would be from a more informed place would be like, yeah, of course, because there can be, I mean, in a gay, let's just say, gay man on gay man relationship, where they both identify as men, one of them can be more masculine and the other more feminine. And the more masculine one can be toxic. And this can apply in like lesbian relationships as well. They're both women. They're in a lesbian relationship. One of them can be more masculine and take on socially masculine roles and express that in a toxic way towards the other partner. And that just comes to.
Where is that? So now are these stereotypes then that we're talking about with those roles?
I want to say yes, but stereotypes are, I think, just as real as gender, or at least the elements of gender expression itself. Because if we have, let's see, if it's a stereotype that men will go shirtless at the beach, like you see, a guy at the beach and he has his shirt on, and you're like, well, why? Guys are usually shirtless at the beach. And that's probably not a great example, but I'm just going to run with it. That's a stereotype, and it doesn't hold true universally, but in general, you go to the beach, most of the guys are going to have their shirts off. So it's a pretty accurate stereotype in terms of how it applies in real life. It may not be based in anything real and solid and fundamental about what it means to be a man, but it is a real phenomenon that we see, and so that in that sense, it is a stereotype, but it's also just kind of like a fact of a sociological fact of where we are. And so I would like to clarify. So when it comes to, there was a point where we were asking, where you were asking me, so if these traits are toxic, we can all agree these are toxic because they cause some sort of harm. So we agree on toxic, but why should we continue to label them toxically masculine? Like, what is the benefit of maintaining the label of masculine?
Why pigeonhole this, I guess, or why not just call the traits toxic and treat them instead of like having to label it with a gender, is where I was coming from with that. Because
right, and so
good can apply to non-binary people. They can apply to, like you said, they could apply to lesbian relationships. They could apply to women. So does that make them feminine now, or does that make them non-binary traits now? Why aren't these toxic traits being labeled under those things as well? That confuses me a bit.
Well, my answer to that would be because the traits themselves are something that we see as being associated with masculinity, and women can be masculine. Non-binary people can have masculine elements to them. Like for instance, you have a beard. That's masculine. That doesn't make you a masculine person, but that's a masculine feature. Not many feminine people have a beard, but you have a mix. You also have the very well done makeup going on. And, so that helps to balance it in a way that and obviously you don't owe anybody androgyny. Like that's the thing that we all know by now, I think. But,
but that is where I consider myself. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you're doing a good job of it, and that's what feels right to you, but you still have masculine traits to you, but that doesn't make you a man. That doesn't mean that you are the gender of man just because you have masculine traits to you. And the same would apply to a woman who has masculine traits to her. So, and
it's so weird because it's been done in a way that women can have facial hair. Many women do have facial hair. It's just that they've been in a society that's put them in that box that says you can't have facial hair.
Exactly. And that's
not a woman. So it's so weird.
I would say that's toxic. Yeah. So it is masculine in the sense that is what our society perceives as something that masculine people do. Now, narrowing it into a box that only men can partake in that masculine trait, maybe I would say, that's a toxic masculine trait there. Like that's a toxic masculine stereotype that we have, that if a woman happens to grow facial hair, that she's no longer a woman or she's not feminine enough. Like she can have a masculine quality or a masculine feature, I should say, and still not be an overall masculine person, so for me, and the reason that I would defend maintaining the masculine qualifier to the toxic traits is because definitionally, almost the majority of masculine people in our society will be cis men. And cis people want to be perceived as the gender they are as well. That's a thing that we have to acknowledge. Like as somebody, as people who fall outside of the spectrum, they, somebody like yourself, somebody who's trans, anything like that, they don't want to be seen as the gender that society has labeled them as. So they want to get outside of that box. So for somebody in your position, it's like, why should we even bother considering that? And I get that. But in the wider societal context, if you have a man who is behaving in very toxic ways, maybe he was raised that way, maybe he just has picked up on that from society, and we're trying to reshape society in a healthier way in general. Maybe there's a talk about, can we get rid of gendered traits and such? But I think that project maybe is a little later down the road. I'm not saying it's out of the question entirely, but I want to say we've got to get cis men on board with at least acknowledging the traits that they stick to that are toxic. And by keeping the masculine there, you can say like, what you're doing, yes, it's masculine, but it's also toxic. So in contrast over here, here's something that's also masculine, but it's not toxic. It's healthy, or it's neutral, or it's acceptable. You can still be masculine. That's what you as a cis man, not you, this hypothetical person, as a cis man, that's what you want to be seen as. You want to be seen as a masculine man. So here's another option for you of how to present yourself masculinely in a masculine way that isn't toxic towards other people.
So here's where I'd see it too, is that like my problem with that is a couple things here. I'll touch on one. For one, I would consider this more of I think what we're talking about, and that's this terminology, and I know I'm being nitpicky about it, but I would say I would label it as systemic misogyny. I think that would be a more proper name than what this thing is that we're the toxic masculinity thing. But that's, like I said, I know I'm being nitpicky a little bit about it, and but I don't think you disagree with that. I don't know.
No, actually, I had never thought about saying it that way. But I do think that's a good way to talk about it from the perspective of a group of people that aren't masculine or don't consider themselves to be masculine in general. I think from an outsider's perspective, calling it like that, like you said, systemic, misogyny, I'm like, that's pretty clever. I know I've heard that term thrown around, but I didn't connect it specifically to toxic masculinity. But
Now,
if we're having, go ahead.
Also is that, like, now when you talk about cis straight men and all of this and going into those things with tying that to masculinity and all of that, like my brain goes to, okay, the majority of the country has been Christian for X amount of years, and I was considering myself in that box because I've been forced into that box. So how many people are actually straight cisgender people, and how many are just forced into that, and how many are not even able to question it because we keep enforcing this idea of the gender roles and the stereotypes that go along with it, or the masculine versus feminine thing. And I don't know how we would ever even get that honest statistic out of people because of the systemic misogyny, I guess.
Yeah. So to that, I could say the way I see it is, so part of toxic masculinity is I want to say, let me process this 1 second so I can get the right words. Included in the general package of toxic masculinity that is prominent in our society is the tendency to paint things in black and white and to not think about the grayscale in between. So if we want to find out how many people, maybe if given the opportunity, would not identify as masculine, not identify as man anymore, and maybe could see themselves just kind of abolishing the concept altogether, if we even want that to become a possibility, we have to force the gray area into view. We have to force them to see that there is gray between the black and white, and so many freaking shades of it, and it's really cool. So come check it out. And they're not going to do that if they're still associating with the toxic masculine traits that were ingrained into them through maybe their upbringing, or even, again, just social expectations in general.
Right.
So for me, that's why it's, go ahead.
Now, also, while I was considering myself cis and all of that as well, and I don't know, with you, before you started breaking these things down as well, if somebody were to tell you that you're being toxic, that you were subject to toxic masculinity, that this is the things that you're expressing, how would you take that? I wouldn't have taken it well. I'm going to
process it so I can be as honest as possible, because I know I was a fairly toxic person before I was able to break down all of those constructs and expectations that had been, burned into me. So I want to say, if you caught me at the peak of my toxicity and told me you're toxic, I'm pretty sure I would have been not receptive to it. And that's the honest thing I could say. However, it also wasn't in my world. It was something that every now and then it would pop up. Some of the toxic masculinity, like there were little voices on the outside. When it became something that I was exposed to more, that's when I began to learn about it. And that's when it began to change my mind about it. I think I was well out of identifying as a Christian, and maybe even pretty close to being a full naturalist before I was able to break down the concept of gender far enough that I wanted to learn how to not be a toxic man. And I think if we keep pushing the narrative of like, look, toxic masculinity, it needs to be accompanied with just as much talk about positive or wholesome or caring masculinity, or whatever kind of labels we want to put on that stuff, to show like, here's a way you can be a man's man. Here, no. Look at this example of this man's man. He's a man. He kicks ass. He's tough. He's protector, provider, but also look at the way he shows love. Look at how he expresses his emotions. Look at how unafraid he is to explore things that are unfamiliar to him, instead of this view that we have of kind kind of being behind walls of here's my masculine wall and nothing gets past it. Like that. I'm trying to think of a good example.
I guess it's horrible trying to even untangle what influences from this has been from Christianity, what influences has been from, because I think there's a lot of systemic things going on, and
Oh yeah.
just like there's systemic racism, there's systemic
Yeah.
misogyny, and there's almost like systemic Christianity in this country.
There is.
Where it's influenced the laws, it's influenced the society and the way that it's been shaped because of the laws that it's influenced, and just for so long, it's hard to untangle or separate things into boxes and make it clear cut. It's just as much of a gray area as what gender is itself.
Yeah.
So it's I get that, and I get that we're talking in like I'm almost talking in circles because of that. But
Right.
It's an interesting topic nonetheless, I think.
I enjoy it. You know, like sometimes it's hard, I think, to pinpoint the axial topic at hand, like the main thing that it all revolves around, because I think, you know, obviously, you know, physics is clean, biology is messy, and sociology is just unfathomable. Like when it comes to all of the complex intertwining, interweaving, unspoken things that make up what we consider to be our culture and our social interactions, it's really hard to narrow it down to one thing to talk about. So like I'm here defending, in a sense, the idea of continuing to address, in order to eliminate toxic masculinity, continuing to use that term for the reasons I already said, you know, so that masculine people see that we're talking about the way they're acting and how it's affecting everyone else around them. At the same time, I'm not entirely sure like how this is going to work into the overall picture because of all the other factors. Like if I had, let's just say again, this perfect image of this masculine man, and he is just nothing but wholesome and awesome, and everybody loves him. He's just like, okay, I'm a toxic man, but even I wouldn't want to mess with that guy. He stands up for what he believes in, blah, 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 but he's also so kind to everybody and seems so wise, and he's just the perfect shining example of what a man should be. Nobody is afraid to be around him unless they're against him, kind of thing. If we had that, oh, I think I gave too many details and lost my train of thought. Oh man, do you remember what I was saying right before that?
You're
Oh, okay. Oh, that's where it was going. Okay. So yeah, we've got that perfect image and we present him, but maybe he's an atheist, or maybe he's a Hindu, or maybe he's a Buddhist. And the Christian sees that and goes, well, I can't be like the Buddhist guy. I don't want to be like that. He's only like that because he's a Buddhist, so that makes it wrong. Like everybody else seems to like it, but yeah, the world is against us Christians anyway. So I'm going to keep being the man that I am, and I don't care how people feel about it. You know, like there is that to consider.
Yeah.
And I do consider it. I do know also religiosity in general and Christianity specifically are taking a loss worldwide, and in America especially, where they're starting to lose their numbers. They're starting to lose their dominance. So I think over time, just keep chipping away, we may see something great happen.
So another thing that we kind of started discussing, which this kind of, it ties together in a weird way, but the propaganda and things that have been bleeding in from Christianity, and not just from Christianity itself, but almost like a fascist propaganda that's been springing about. And I know you've seen it as well in the skeptic and humanist groups,
Yeah.
where this idea of the woke agenda and cancel culture and these terms get thrown about and everything. Like now I'm going to get off on it, get off topic, but these things, what do you think about this? Oh, I did not write notes down for this, so I'm going to be spitballing this.
We're just freeballing it now. So you're wanting to know my take on the way that fascism is seeping into the skeptical community?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy, this is something I've actually had to think about a lot lately because I'm trying to think of, there's one example specifically. Oh, it's irritating. Oh, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is one great example that we can stop on real quick to get into this, because obviously, in a sense, he's a great skeptic. The influence he's had in helping break down Christian ideologies in science and biology, it's like you can't argue it. I mean, he's written some of the greatest books, breaking, like, the Blind Watchmaker just completely destroyed the notion of an intelligent designer, like, which was the fallback after creationism, was like, well, what if we do intelligent designer instead? But he's like, no, watch, check this out, I'll destroy it real quick. And he did a fantastic job. But then
God Delusion, I believe.
What's that?
God Delusion.
Oh, the God Delusion. I never read it. I've never read it, and from my understanding that I've heard from some more philosophically inclined thinkers, it's not very good. Apparently it's good at like a public level, like a
directly read
popular.
it. I read the I haven't made it all the way through that, but I've read parts of it, and I've read the God Virus that that Dr. Daryl Ray had wrote that was similar. It was based on the God Delusion, but it was
right.
Comparing to Christianity to a virus and going into details of through history, how it's evolved and things like that. But yeah, Dawkins is he's definitely with his debates and everything and his writings. Yeah, it's hard to argue that he hasn't had a good influence on the atheist community, or that he hasn't been a big part of humanism and things of that nature. But
and then he turns around now, and he's a force against trans identities. He's against it. And I can't give a specific quote or post of that, but I just know I've seen a lot of people talking about.
He had Twitter posts up years before he had his stroke and all of that stuff. He's been posting things that had to do with basically devaluing non-binary as a thing, and trans people in general. And he also was promoting Deborah So's book, which Deborah So's a terribly transphobic human being that's Canadian. She had worked under another transphobic person who I can't think of his name, but he was they're psychologists, and they're using that platform to spread basically the same fascist.
Not Jordan Peterson, is it?
No, but I believe Peterson, or I know that there were a lot of people putting their names with Deborah So's book along with Dawkins that were in that same mindset as the Jordan Peterson thing. I can't think of the guy's name right offhand. He has a podcast, and I think he tries to shy away from actually being a conservative or labeling himself as such, but he does.
Dave Rubin?
No. This is killing me. He talks real fast. He does a Gish Gallop whenever he has people on. And he's Jewish, but he's always
Ben Shapiro.
Yes.
Yes.
Ben Shapiro. He's signed his name on Deborah So's book as well, and promoting.
Yeah, he's problematic. He is very problematic. Yeah.
And not that should be any indicator in itself, but whenever you see Dawkins putting his name alongside these like garbage people, that should be a red flag to people that something's up.
and back on track with that was like, it's crazy because he's so good at seeing the nuance in being properly skeptical about all the issues relating to how evolution works and how he can get into the details of these opposing views and show why they're not correct in such a beautiful, skeptical, evidence-based way. And then when the trans issue comes up, it's just la 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 la. I refuse to hear it because it doesn't match with what I think. And it's like, how does
somehow he's
somebody
able to
like that do that?
that? Yeah,
I don't get it.
And there's this thing. He seems to be drawn to that cancel culture thing as well. Like his fan base. Oh my God! Whenever these things started actually coming out, and this became more like when Dawkins, one of his awards got taken away, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Now, you know what I mean? People started calling this cancel culture and started sweeping it into that platform and politicizing all of these things. And it's like, did they take away his book sales? Are they making him give money back that he made off of all this shit? Or did they just take his award away and say that, well, we don't want to associate ourselves with this?
Exactly. And it's so funny because the crowd that is critical of the concept of canceling people that are problematic, they are the first to jump on board with dissociating from anybody that they find problematic. I feel like the conservative crowd that complains about, oh, cancel culture, they support capitalism, which is essentially institutionalized cancel culture. Like that makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and the problem is this isn't just conservatives that are doing this now. This
of course, yeah,
has bled over into, I know a lot of liberals and a lot of progressives that this has swept into. It's like the way that this propaganda works and the way that I've seen it work is the same way that fascist, that's why I labeled as fascist, is because it's mimicking those exact things from World War II and from Hitler's reign and everything, where he was actually mimicking, prior to that, the US's use of fascism with slavery. He was basing his model off of that. So it like all comes full circle with all of it at a certain point. But you can find old propaganda and stuff with Hitler's a caricature thing or a drawing of Hitler, and there's tape over his mouth saying that basically everyone's able to say all of these things. Everyone has freedom of speech, but poor Hitler. Like trying to make him out like his freedom of speech was being taken away because people were not they were railing against his bigotry. They didn't like his bigotry, so they were cancel culturing him at the time. And that's exactly what's happening now. It happened under Trump with all of the bigoted things he was doing and the people coming to his rallies that were white supremacists and stuff, and him preaching this America First thing. That was the exact same shit that was happening with Christian nationalism and stuff during the time of the wars. And it's still the propaganda, the way that it's working off of people's fears the same way that it was then. People's fears and insecurities, and who's more fearful and insecure than the Christians? So it's able to really, really affect them. But then people like Dawkins on the more left side of things, it's able to also bleed over into that area because Christians had suppressed the speech of atheists for so long in this country that now that's a fear that works with them as well. So they're working off of that same insecure thing, and I think that's where we see the generational thing as well. Like because of Dawkins being older, maybe it's influencing him more because he's directly seen how those things have influenced legislation and things throughout the years. But from a perspective of a younger person and seeing how these generations past have been brought up in an environment now to where it isn't that way, we're able to kind of maybe see through that a little bit. It's crazy though that at the same time that he's able to just block out you know, that this was happening too during World War II, and this was
Right.
heavily, this is the fascist thing you're scared of, that you're
Exactly. You are partaking in it. You're encouraging it. It just occurred to me while you're talking there, my thoughts starting to kind of make some connections, and I'm almost wondering, or at least it seems likely to me, one of the reasons why the left is pushing, like why we're seeing factions of the left that are falling in line with this too, is because I think the outcry against cancel culture in general is tied to the fact that the people. So let me see how I can trace this out. The people, the issues that we're seeking cancellation for are issues tied to minorities, racism, sexism, misogyny, issues of, LGBTQ issues, all that kind of stuff, all related to, minority populations and identities. And so we've had a very problematic cultural zeitgeist for quite a long time now. And so people were kind of given a very loose leash with which to express their problematic views and not challenged for them. So right now, I think what we're seeing is a social reckoning of sorts, of saying, we're not going to stand for that kind of behavior. And now I do feel this is where I become conflicted, because let's say any given person of note that's in the public eye, they seem like a fairly decent person now. They seem to stand for pretty decent values now. And there up comes footage of them from 15, 20 years ago saying or doing something very problematic. It is, I'm conflicted, because I do think they should have to address it. I do think it should have to be, why did you do this? How do you feel about it now? Or is there something you're going to do to correct for the mistake, the harm that you caused for that? Is there something you're going to do to make that better? But it also sucks too, because if they have made so much change, if they have been a force for good in the time since then, and they're not given the chance to try to make amends or try to take a better stance, then maybe it seems a little bit counterproductive, because we're losing a helpful person. But I'm conflicted against that, because it also, I don't know that it is the case that that's happening. It may be the case that these people just aren't taking responsibility and not taking ownership of the negative things that they've done, and instead they're just wanting to push forward without having to address the past. So that's me conversing with myself right there.
I completely agree. And there's this thing, like an example I can think of is Dave Chappelle pushing the thing in his comedy acts with trans people. And it was like, the first one that he came out with, it was like, oh, okay, that was, I laughed along with it and everything. Was like, okay, it's just Dave being edgy or whatever. And now it's like 4 fucking specials in, and it's like he's still beating this dead horse over. And it's like, he had such an issue with his comedy routines being used against black people, because it was it could be flipped around to where it was racist things he was doing in a way that was wow, my mind blanked out on the word. He was doing it in a way that was what's that?
I was gonna say, were you going for maybe something like he was kind of trying to draw, he was trying to draw attention to it and turn it around, but yeah,
it was a sarcastic way of doing this that wasn't meant, just point blank the way that he was doing it. So he steps down from comedy altogether, leaves the country and everything. And then he comes back and he starts his comedy routine by doing this thing against trans people that's having the same effect that he was pissed about the thing happening with the racism. So it's like,
he didn't learn.
No.
He's like, oh, wait, what if I target a different minority group? Oh, okay.
More of the compartmentalization thing, like we see with Dawkins as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it just blows my mind how well that kind of propaganda has worked with people from all aspects of life, because like we're talking about here, it isn't just it's not like Dave Chappelle's a conservative, really. It's not like
Yeah.
Dawkins is really conservative or anything, and a lot of people like that. David P. Silverman, I don't believe he was a
Mhm.
conservative either. But all of these conservative views are bleeding over, or what we would consider to
Mhm.
be conservative views. Um, so yeah, it's wild to see that, and I actually ended up having somebody on. Joe Rogan's another one that I can think of that
Yeah.
he, which that could be for ratings or whatever, but I hate that he does as soon as he would get called out on any of it, he can always fall back to well, I'm just big dumb Joe. I
Yeah.
don't know anything, and that's what my podcast is about. So it's like he I don't know what you'd call waffling or whatever
Yeah.
on the issues, but yeah. Um, so we're coming up on about an hour.
All right.
I think we'll end it here, and it's been
Sure.
great having you on.
It's been a
Do
fun
you have
conversation. I
yeah.
love being able, like I said, I love being able to, like, there were a couple of moments there. I saw myself walking through things that I hadn't really walked all the way through yet. So it's like that's the benefit of things like this, and I do enjoy doing them in general, but I like doing them over recorded sessions where if it's in my mind and I'm like, the hell did I say? Or like, I said something and I'm not sure I made a good point there. Or maybe even opposite, like the other person said something. It's just like, it's bugging me. Maybe I didn't respond well enough, or maybe I didn't hear them right. Let me go back and listen to it again. That's why I like doing these kind of things.
Yeah, I hate hearing myself again, so this will probably be the last time I listen to this, but I enjoy the conversation in the moment, and
Yes.
I like it does help me to question things that maybe I didn't quite see things from that perspective before, and you've seen it
Mhm.
a different way, and I love that, getting to see how other people have taken these topics or whatever that have been
Absolutely.
bothering me, because this has been something that's been in my head for a while, spinning around, and so yeah, it's been great having you on. Is there any are there any podcasts of yours or any content that you would like to
Um,
share, or anything?
I did start a podcast, but it's been well over a year since I've done anything with it. With my sibling, we called, we started a podcast called Not Today Jesus, as a spin on the Not Today Satan thing. Um, and there's always kind of the hope that we're going to get back into it. We talk about it every now and then, but I go through some mental health issues myself, and they're also going through some things in their life. So it's like kind of we never match up at a point where we are both in a good place to do it. But hopefully that'll change soon. Anyway, if anybody wants to go see I think 2, 3, maybe 4 episodes we posted, I can't even remember now. It's Not Today Jesus, and it's on I know it's on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, stuff like that. So if you're interested, we did have a few good fun conversations on there, and one that I really want people to listen to, that I took part in is a pod. I hate to give the guy views, but I thought it was such a good conversation and how well I whooped his ass, in a very non-confrontational, very intellectual way. He is a guy, I forget what his name is now, but he wrote a book called The God Conclusion, as a clapback against the God delusion. And I bumped across his page on Facebook, and I saw a couple memes that he posted that were just so stupid I had to comment on them, just to like lay out some sort of foundational thought process as to like how wrong that those memes were, like how stupid they were. And at first he responded with anger, and then eventually I think I got him to see that I actually have thought this shit through. And so he actually sent me a PDF of his book, invited me to read it and come on his podcast. So I read a couple. I didn't read the whole thing, but I read a couple chapters, and then I was on his podcast. So his podcast is called The God Conclusion. And if you find I think it was like episode 8 that I was on, but it's, God Conclusion, Kent Schofield, look it up and you'll see that conversation there. I'd like to have people check that out, because one of the big things we get into is intelligent design, and fine tuning. That's like a big topic of mine, a big interest of mine. And I just absolutely tore everything apart that he had to say. And I let him ramble for a while. He goes on about near-death experiences, but and I tried to steer it back over to the good stuff that actually matters. And I just thought it was, I've listened, I don't usually like to listen to my own voice, but I've listened to myself on that podcast about 4 times just because I'm like, I'm glad I said that. There were a couple times I wish I said something that I didn't say anything. I let him ramble when I wish I would have interjected, but overall, I'm like, I did a damn good job with that.
It's funny. I've had a couple times where I've run into things like that, but I'm so hypercritical of myself, and then going back at it, it's like I didn't do too bad actually. But yeah, this platform that I have isn't geared towards debate, and I've never felt comfortable actually having that happen or having a debate on here. But because this is supposed to be a little bit more educational, getting you to think a little bit about things and stuff like that, instead of
critical conversations rather than contentious debate.
Right. And if there's things in the news at the time or whatever, early on episodes, I was doing it in a more news article type fashion. And now it's kind of into more just conversational type deal.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about possibly bringing back the old platform at some point if I can get a steady co-host to do all of it with, which
there you go.
Point, I'm hoping to have him back on now that I'm getting geared back up again.
There you go.
So it's been great having you on, and be sure to check all of that out, your content and your sibling Echo, I believe is that. I know I've listened to a few, at least 1 or 2 episodes of what your guys' content. Really good stuff. So hopefully all of my 10 listeners will go out and look that up. So we'll see you. Hopefully I'll have you on again soon.
Yeah, stay in contact, and if we have another topic and time we can make it work, let me know. We'll shoot for it. I had fun.
All right. Our artwork is by Jamie Coptic. You can check out the rest of their work at jamiecoptic.studio. Our music is by Bridge City Centers, through and through, and you can find them at bridgecitycenters.com. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube and donate to us at paypal.me/skepticalsatanist. Hate mail, death threats, or fan mail, send that to jesuschristalmighty@hotmail.com or get a hold of us on Facebook. Whatever you do, don't leave this YouTube channel without liking and subscribing to keep up on all of our content.